In the heart of America, where corporate towers touch the clouds, power is often hidden behind glass doors and cold handshakes. A young black woman walks into an office full of dreams, ready for her shot at success. But instead of respect, she faces humiliation that cuts deep. What no one in that room expects, however, is that the tables will turn, and in the most chilling, unforgettable way. This is not just a story about a job interview. It is about strength, prejudice, pride, and the shocking moment when the very person belittled becomes the one everyone bows to. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The morning sun reflected off the glass buildings of downtown Chicago, turning the streets into mirrors of gold. Cars honked, buses hissed, and people in press suits rushed with coffee in one hand and phones in the other. It was just another weekday for most, but for Maya Johnson, it was the day that could change her life. She stood at the corner of Madison Street, adjusting the strap of her black leather bag. Her resume was tucked inside, along with carefully printed references and the hope that today would finally open a door for her. She had studied late into the night for years, worked jobs that barely paid the rent, and now she was ready. The interview at Harlan & Co., one of the biggest consulting firms in the country, was her chance. Maya inhaled deeply before walking toward the skyscraper. The glass doors slid open, and a blast of cold air conditioning hit her face. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee. People moved quickly, badges swinging from their necks. Everyone looked like they belonged. She walked up to the front desk, forcing a polite smile. "Good morning. I'm here for an interview with the Human Resources team." The receptionist, a young man with blonde hair and a stiff smile, glanced at her briefly before looking back at his computer. "Name: Maya Johnson." His eyes flicked to her again, slower this time, before he typed something into the screen. "Sit over there. Someone will come get you." His tone was flat, dismissive. Maya nodded, though her chest tightened. She sat down in the waiting area, watching as other candidates walked in. Most of them wore tailored suits, carrying leather portfolios that looked expensive. A few glanced at her, some with quick smiles, others with eyes that lingered a second too long before looking away. After 10 minutes, a woman in a sharp navy suit appeared. She looked Maya up and down with the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Maya Johnson?" "Yes, that's me. Follow me." Maya stood, straightened her blazer, and followed the woman into the elevator. The ride up was silent except for the hum of the machine. Maya could feel the woman's eyes on her reflection in the glass panels. She didn't say anything. When the doors opened, Maya stepped into a hallway lined with glass offices. Men and women inside typed on laptops or spoke on headsets. She was led into a large conference room with a long table. Sitting there were 3 people, 2 men and a woman. All of them wore the same expression, polished, unreadable, and slightly impatient. "Sit," one of the men said without looking up from paper. Maya sat down, her palms pressing against her knees under the table. The woman in the middle leaned forward first. "So, Maya Johnson, your resume says you graduated top of your class from Howard University. Impressive." "Yes, ma'am. But tell me," the woman continued, tilting her head, "what makes you think you belong here? This is a high-level firm. We handle clients worth billions. This isn't just any office." Maya felt the sting in her chest. She chose her words carefully. "I believe my background in data analysis and project leadership makes me well-suited. I've managed large projects under pressure and delivered results consistently." One of the men chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You manage projects at a small nonprofit, right? That's admirable. But this isn't community work. This is real business." The other man leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Let me ask you something. If we put you in front of one of our top clients, a CEO in a Fortune 500 company, do you really think they'd take you seriously?" The room went silent. Maya's heart raced. She tightened her fingers together under the table, but she didn't break eye contact. "I believe professionalism and results speak louder than assumptions." The woman smirked, exchanging a glance with the others. "That's a nice line." She flipped a paper on the table. "But let's be honest here. You don't exactly fit the image our clients are used to." Maya understood what she meant without her saying it out loud. Her chest burned, but she forced her face to remain calm. The first man leaned forward now, his tone sharper. "Here's the thing, Maya. This firm doesn't have time for experiments. We need people who look the part, act the part, and can walk into a room without raising eyebrows. You understand?" Something inside her cracked, but she kept her voice steady. "With respect, I believe raising eyebrows isn't always a bad thing. It can also mean standing out for the right reasons." The woman in the middle leaned back, her smile sharper now. "Confident. That's good. But confidence doesn't always equal capability." The air in the room felt heavy. Maya could feel every second dragging. Every word they spoke wasn't just about her resume. It was about her skin, her presence. She glanced at the glass wall beside her. Through it, she could see people walking past, busy with their own work, unaware of the silent battle happening inside. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. The man who had laughed earlier scribbled something on his paper. "We'll see. Maybe you'll surprise us." His tone made it clear he didn't believe that. Maya sat there, still, her mind screaming, but her face unreadable. Little did they know, the next person walking into that room would change everything. The conference room door creaked open. Maya turned her head slightly, relieved for a brief distraction. A young assistant with a clipboard peeked in. "Excuse me," the assistant said softly. "Mr. Harlan just arrived. He'll be heading this way soon." The three interviewers straightened in their chairs, their faces shifting into something almost rehearsed, polished smiles, quick adjustments of ties and jackets. It was like watching masks slide into place. Maya caught it instantly. The same people who had been looking down on her just moments ago suddenly looked alert, almost nervous. "Thank you," the woman in the navy suit said, her tone clipped but respectful. The assistant nodded and closed the door. Maya swallowed hard, trying not to show her curiosity. She'd heard of Mr. Edward Harlan, the CEO of Harlan & Co., a man known for his commanding presence, sharp mind, and ruthless business deals. She hadn't expected him to be anywhere near her interview, let alone walking into the same room. One of the men cleared his throat and leaned toward her. "You'll need to be on your best behavior when he steps in. Don't speak unless spoken to." His voice carried authority, but Maya noticed a flicker of tension in his eyes. The woman in the middle smiled tightly. "Yes, and remember, this is his company. He built it. So watch yourself." Maya's stomach twisted, but she nodded calmly. She had been warned about men like Edward Harlan, powerful, distant, impossible to impress. Still, she reminded herself why she was here. She had prepared for this moment, maybe not for humiliation, but for a test. And she refused to fail. The clock ticked. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, the door opened again. Edward Harlan walked in. He was taller than Maya expected, with sharp features and a silver streak in his dark hair. His suit was simple but perfect, the kind of outfit that didn't need labels to scream money and power. His presence filled the room instantly. The three interviewers all rose from their seats, plastering smiles across their faces. "Mr. Harlan," the woman greeted, her voice a notch higher, almost sweet. He nodded briefly at them before his eyes shifted across the table. Then he saw Maya. For a moment, his step slowed. His gaze lingered on her longer than anyone else in the room. Maya felt her throat tighten, but she refused to look away. Their eyes locked. "Maya Johnson," the woman said quickly, eager to control the moment. "One of today's candidates." Her tone carried that same subtle sharpness, as if to remind him, and Maya, that she didn't belong. Edward Harlan walked closer, but instead of taking the empty seat at the head of the table, he stopped beside Maya. The air grew heavy, and silence stretched too long. "Johnson," he said finally, his voice deep and even. "Howard University. Top of your class. Data analysis. Nonprofit leadership." He spoke as though he had memorized a resume. Impressive. The interviewers exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Maya felt her pulse race. "Thank you, sir," she said, keeping her voice steady. Harlan studied her for another second before finally moving to the head of the table. He sat down, and the others quickly followed. "Let's continue," he said, folding his hands. The woman cleared her throat, forcing her composure. "Yes, of course. As we were discussing, we have concerns about fit." Maya caught the emphasis. Harlan did too. His eyes flicked briefly toward the woman, and something cold moved across his face. "Fit," he repeated. "Yes, sir," she continued quickly. "This is a high-profile firm. We need people who can seamlessly represent our image in front of clients." Edward leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Image," he said slowly, tasting the word. His gaze shifted back to Maya, then to the papers on the table. He tapped one finger against them. "Tell me, Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice quieter now, but sharper, "what's the biggest challenge you've ever faced in a professional setting, and how did you handle it?" Maya didn't hesitate. Her body leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on the table. "At the nonprofit where I worked, we lost nearly half our funding overnight. Programs were shutting down, staff were leaving, and the people who relied on us were scared. I gathered what little resources we had left, reorganized the team, and built a system to prioritize the most critical services. We survived those 6 months and even secured new funding by the end of the year." The room was silent. Edward's expression didn't change much, but Maya noticed his eyes sharpen with interest. "That took leadership," he said finally. Maya nodded. "It took belief. If I didn't believe we could make it work, no one else would have followed me." The second man, who had laughed earlier, shifted in his chair. "Still, that was a small-scale project. Nothing like handling billion-dollar clients." His voice sounded defensive, almost nervous. Edward's head turned slowly toward him. "Yet," he said calmly, "leadership is leadership. Scale can be taught. Vision cannot." The man froze, his mouth snapping shut. Maya's chest tightened as she processed what had just happened. Edward Harlan had defended her in front of his own team. The woman tried to recover. Of course, so we're just being thorough. Edward didn't look at her. His gaze returned to Maya. Do you want this job? The question was simple, but the weight of it pressed heavily. Maya straightened her shoulders. Yes, sir, I've worked too hard to stand on the outside of places like this. I know I can add value here. Edward's lips curved slightly, but not quite into a smile. Good answer. The interviewers scribbled things on their papers, their pens scratching nervously. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. Maya could feel it. They had tried to corner her, to belittle her. But now, with Harlan's presence, every word felt different. The CEO leaned forward slightly, his eyes still locked on Maya. Let's see how you handle pressure then. He pressed a button on the table, and moments later, the assistant reappeared. Bring in the case files, Harlan ordered. Yes, sir. The assistant left quickly, and within minutes, he returned carrying a thick folder. He placed it in front of Maya. Edward spoke firmly. You have 15 minutes. Review this case and tell us how you'd approach the client's problem. No internet. No notes. Just your mind. Maya's hands rested on the folder. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. She opened it, scanning quickly. Numbers, graphs, market reports, all dense and overwhelming. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The room was silent except for the soft shuffle of pages as she read. Every pair of eyes was on her. The interviewers looked smug again, certain she would fail. But Edward's expression was unreadable, as if he was watching for something deeper than just an answer. Maya's fingers traced one of the charts. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments, patterns, hidden details. 15 minutes felt like seconds slipping through her hands. Her throat was dry, her back straight. She took one last glance at the figures, closed the folder slowly, and lifted her eyes. I have a strategy, she said. Every head turned. Edward's stare sharpened. Then let's hear it. The next words that came out of Maya's mouth would determine everything. The air in the room tightened the moment Maya said she had a strategy. The interviewers leaned forward, their pens ready, waiting for her to stumble. Edward Harlan's face stayed unreadable, but his eyes held a sharp focus, as if he was testing more than just her knowledge. Maya took a steady breath before speaking. The client's issue isn't just about falling profits, she began. Her voice was calm, but inside, her heart was pounding. It's about identity. The data shows a decline in sales, but when you look closely, the biggest drop is in customer loyalty. They're losing not just buyers, but believers. And once people stop believing in a brand, no marketing campaign or budget shift will save it. The woman interviewer raised an eyebrow, almost mocking. That's an interesting theory, but these are numbers. They don't have emotions. Maya met her gaze without flinching. Numbers reflect behavior, and behavior is built on trust. If trust is broken, the numbers bleed. This company doesn't just need a sales strategy, it needs a rebuilding of faith. Customers need to feel like they're part of the brand again. If I were leading this, I'd start by analyzing what drove loyalty before the decline and build campaigns that remind people why they chose this company in the first place. Her words hung in the air. One of the men chuckled under his breath, scribbling something on his notepad. So, your big solution is feelings? Maya's jaw tightened, but she didn't break. She leaned forward slightly. My big solution is connection. Numbers are important, but they're the surface. Connection is what keeps those numbers alive. Ignore that, and the company dies quietly, no matter how polished the spreadsheets look. The smirk on the man's face faded. For the first time, Edward Harlan spoke again. His tone was low, measured, but it carried weight. Go on. Maya nodded, flipping one of the charts toward him. Right here, customer engagement fell by 30% after they cut their rewards program. On paper, they saved money, but in reality, they lost their community. If I were advising this client, I'd push for a modernized reward system, something that costs less but gives people a reason to stay loyal. Combine that with targeted digital campaigns focusing on trust and transparency, and we're not just fixing numbers, we're fixing relationships. Silence. The room seemed to shift again, as if her words had tilted the balance. The interviewers exchanged quick glances, none of them eager to speak first. Edward tapped his fingers slowly on the table, his eyes never leaving Maya. Finally, he asked, and what about competition? If another brand already has stronger loyalty, how do you pull customers back? Maya didn't hesitate. By being bold. If the competition is winning loyalty through price, then you don't compete on price, you compete on value. Give customers what no one else can. If they feel seen, heard, and respected, they'll come back, even if it costs them more. People don't just buy products. They buy stories. They buy belonging. For the first time, Edward leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The woman in navy fidgeted with her pen. It's an idealistic approach, she muttered. Edward turned his head slowly toward her, and his voice cut through the air. No, it's leadership. The room fell silent again. Maya could feel her pulse in her fingertips, but she kept her expression calm. She had walked into this room, humiliated, pushed, and tested. But now, the power felt like it was shifting. Edward closed the folder. You handle that better than most senior consultants we've had. His tone was cool, but the weight of his words landed heavy. The two men scribbled quickly on their papers, their movements sharp and uneasy. The woman forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Impressive, Ms. Johnson. Truly. But the words sounded like ash in her mouth. Edward stood, suddenly, straightening his jacket. I've heard enough for today. He glanced at Maya. Walk with me. The interviewers stiffened, shocked. One of them stammered, Sir, we still have. Edward raised a hand. The man stopped mid-sentence. Maya rose slowly, clutching her bag. She followed Edward as he walked out of the conference room. The door shut behind them with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than anything else that morning. The hallway was quiet except for the click of Edward's shoes against the polished floor. Maya tried to steady her breathing. She didn't know where this was going, but every step away from that room felt like stepping deeper into something bigger than she'd expected. He stopped at the window, overlooking the city. The streets looked small from up here, like veins in a living map. Edward clasped his hands behind his back and spoke without looking at her. You kept your composure, he said, even when they tried to break it. That's rare. Maya swallowed hard. Thank you, sir. He turned to face her. His expression was unreadable again, but his eyes burned with something, calculation, maybe even respect. Do you know why I came into that room? Maya hesitated. No, sir. Edward studied her for a long moment before answering. Because sometimes I like to see things for myself. Papers tell me one story. People tell me another. And today, I wanted to see which one you were. Maya met his gaze, unsure what to say. His voice dropped lower. They underestimated you the moment you walked in. I watched it happen. That happens a lot in places like this. Her chest tightened. She wasn't sure if he was acknowledging her struggle or testing her again. Edward glanced back out the window. This firm was built on more than numbers. It was built on seeing what others don't. I don't like blind spots. He turned back to her. You're not one. Maya's breath caught. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. The woman interviewer appeared, her smile stretched too wide. Mr. Harlan, I didn't realize you'd left the session. We still need to. Edward cut her off with a single glance. The woman froze, her words dying instantly. Not now, he said coldly. The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking between him and Maya. There was something sharp in her look, anger, maybe even fear, before she nodded quickly and disappeared back into the conference room. Maya stood still, her pulse racing. Edward Harlan was a man who commanded power with silence alone. And for reasons she didn't yet understand, that power was now pointed in her direction. Edward stepped closer, his voice firm. You're not finished here, Miss Johnson. Not yet. The words sent a chill down her spine. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be simple. Maya followed Edward Harlan down another hallway, her bag still hanging from her shoulder. She could feel her palms sweating, though she didn't dare wipe them against her blazer. The silence between them was heavy. The man moved with purpose, every stride confident, as though every corner of this massive building belonged to him, which it did. Finally, he pushed open a door to a smaller office and gestured for her to step inside. The office was neat, with a wide desk, bookshelves lined with thick business journals, and floor-to-ceiling windows that swallowed the city skyline. Edward didn't sit right away. Instead, he circled the room slowly, as though his thoughts were moving faster than his words. Sit, he said at last, motioning toward a leather chair across from his desk. Maya obeyed, placing her bag gently on the floor. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She felt like she was being pulled into a world she hadn't prepared for. Edward finally sat down, folding his hands on the desk. His sharp eyes studied her like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Yet, you held your ground back there, he said quietly. Most candidates crumble the moment those three start pressing. They're not just interviewing you. They're trying to corner you, to see if you break. You didn't. Maya nodded, her voice steady. I didn't come here to break, sir. A small twitch appeared at the corner of his mouth, though it wasn't quite a smile. He leaned back in his chair. Tell me something. Why do you want to work here? Don't give me the rehearsed answer. Give me the truth. Maya hesitated. She thought about the years she'd spent working nights, juggling side jobs, saving every dollar she could. She thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs to make sure Maya finished college. And she thought about the hundreds of applications she had sent out, most unanswered, some ending in rejection before she even set foot in the building. The truth, she said slowly. Yes, Edward replied, his voice firm. I want to be here, Maya said, her tone gaining strength as the words left her. Not because I want a paycheck or a fancy title. I want to prove I can stand where I'm not expected to stand. Too many doors have been closed before I could even knock. I want to show that I belong in rooms like this one, and not just belong but led. Edward's eyes stayed fixed on her. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, he leaned forward again. That, he said finally, is an honest answer. Before Maya could respond, the office door opened. One of the male interviewers stepped inside without knocking. His face was tight, his words clipped. "Sir, I need a word with you. Privately." Edward didn't move. "You'll speak here." The man's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. His eyes flicked to Maya with something sharp, disdain mixed with disbelief. "With all due respect, sir, we have other candidates waiting. Spending this much time on one interview is unusual." Edward didn't flinch, then let them wait. The man's nostrils flared. He glanced at Maya again, this time letting the silence speak louder than words. Finally, he muttered, "As you wish, sir," and walked out, shutting the door harder than necessary. The tension lingered in the air like smoke. Edward shook his head slightly, almost in irritation. "You see, that's how this place operates. Image, perception, control. Not in the core, talent." His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's why I came today. I needed to see for myself if anyone still had it." Maya kept her hands folded, though her fingers twitched slightly against one another. "And do I?" Edward paused, then said slowly, "You might. But potential is one thing. Proving it is another." Before Maya could answer, the phone on his desk rang. Edward picked it up quickly. "Yes." His voice was sharp, businesslike. "No, handle it. I don't care what he said. If the deal isn't signed by 5, then it's off." He slammed the phone down, his jaw tight. He looked at Maya again, his eyes sharper than before. "How are you under pressure, Ms. Johnson?" She lifted her chin. "Pressure's been my whole life." Edward studied her for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Good, because I'm about to test that." Before Maya could ask what he meant, the office door opened again. This time, it was the woman interviewer. She stood stiff, her smile painted on. "Mr. Harlan, the next candidate is ready." Edward didn't look at her. He was still staring at Maya. "Tell him to wait," he said firmly. The woman blinked. "Sir, we wait?" Edward repeated, his voice like steel. The woman's jaw tightened, but she nodded and backed out, closing the door gently this time. Edward leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Here's what we're going to do. I want you to sit in on the next interview. Watch. Listen. And when it's over, I'll ask you what you saw. Can you do that?" Maya blinked, startled. "Sir, you want me to sit in on?" "Yes," Edward cut in. "Think of it as another test. Not of your knowledge. Of your eyes. Can you see what others miss?" Her chest tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." Edward stood, buttoning his jacket. "Then let's go." They left the office together, walking back toward the conference room. The 3 interviewers were already inside, seated neatly with papers in front of them. Another candidate sat at the table, a tall man in a gray suit, his hair slicked back, his smile wide and confident. The interviewers perked up the moment Edward walked in. The man in gray straightened, eager to impress. But Edward didn't sit right away. Instead, he motioned toward Maya. "She'll be observing," he said simply. The 3 interviewers froze. Their faces twitched, though none of them dared to argue. Maya took a seat in the corner, her hands folded in her lap. The man in gray glanced at her briefly before dismissing her with a flick of his eyes. His focus was on Edward. The interview began. The candidate spoke smoothly, answering every question like he'd rehearsed it 100 times. His words were polished, his smile timed perfectly. The interviewers nodded along, scribbling quickly, impressed. But as Maya watched, she saw cracks. The man's confidence was too slick, his answers too shallow. He dodged when questions dug deeper, hiding behind buzzwords and empty promises. She sat still, her heartbeat loud in her ears. This wasn't just about him, it was about her. Edward had placed her here for a reason. After 20 minutes, the candidate leaned back, certain he had won the room. Edward finally looked at Maya. His eyes were sharp. "Well," he said. Every head turned toward her. The room grew still. Her next words would decide more than just her place in this interview. The room had gone quiet. All eyes turned toward Maya. The man in the gray suit leaned back confidently, his smile wide, certain she couldn't find fault. The interviewers looked expectant, their pens ready to catch her mistake. Edward Harlan, however, simply watched, his gaze steady, testing her without a word. Maya's palms were damp, but she straightened in her seat. She let her eyes linger on the candidate, then shifted to the papers in front of him, then back to his posture. She had learned long ago that silence could be power. She let it stretch a moment before she spoke. "He sounds good," Maya began, her tone measured. "But that's the problem. He sounds too good." Every answer he gave was polished, but none of them were real. The man in gray smile faltered. Maya leaned forward slightly, her voice gaining strength. When he was asked about handling conflict with clients, he gave a textbook answer about communication and transparency. But he never gave an example, not one real experience. When he was asked about solving problems under pressure, he talked about teamwork, but not once did he show how he personally contributed when things got tough. He's selling confidence, not substance. The interviewers shifted uncomfortably. One of the men scribbled furiously on his paper. The woman glanced at Edward nervously, as if hoping he'd stop Maya. But Edward didn't. He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Maya pressed on. "I don't doubt he's smart, but being smart isn't enough here. Clients don't just need someone who can talk smoothly. They need someone who can think when the script doesn't work. He hasn't shown that. The silence in the room was heavy. The candidate's jaw tightened, his charm slipping. That's not true, he said quickly, his voice sharper now. I've handled plenty of difficult situations. You just don't know me. Maya kept her eyes on him, steady and calm. Then you should have shown it. The man's face reddened, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Edward finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice was calm, but carried weight. She's right. The words hit the room like a hammer. The candidate blinked, stunned. The interviewers froze, their pens halting mid-scribble. Edward's eyes locked on the man in gray. Confidence without proof is empty. Thank you for your time. The man's mouth opened slightly, as if to argue, but Edward's tone left no room. He gathered his papers stiffly, his face pale, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Edward turned his head toward Maya. His eyes burned with quiet intensity. You saw it. Most don't. Maya nodded, her chest still tight. Sometimes people hide behind words. You can tell when it doesn't match their eyes. Edward's lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. He looked at the three interviewers. That's what I expect in this firm. Not blind agreement. Not polished lies. Insight. The ability to cut through what's being said and find what isn't. The woman interviewer cleared her throat, her voice hesitant. Of course, sir, but she's a candidate. Edward's gaze snapped to her, sharp as glass. And yet she saw what you didn't. The woman's face flushed, and she looked down quickly at her notes. Maya sat still, fighting the urge to exhale too loudly. She felt the weight of what had just happened. She had spoken against a candidate who seemed perfect on paper, and the CEO had sided with her. It was both empowering and terrifying. Edward stood. That's enough for today. I'll handle the rest. The three interviewers nodded quickly, almost relieved. They began gathering their papers, avoiding Maya's eyes. She lifted her chin. I'd fight for fairness, she said. Not charity. Fairness. Too many companies forget that the people who work for them are human beings, not just numbers on a payroll. If I ever had a seat here, I'd make sure no one forgets that. Edward's eyes narrowed slightly, as though weighing her words. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, he walked to the head of the table. He placed his hand on the tall chair, but he didn't sit. Instead, he turned back to her. You remind me of someone, he said quietly. Maya frowned. Who? Edward didn't answer right away. His gaze seemed to drift, just for a second, as though he were looking at something or someone far away in memory. Then he shook his head slightly and focused back on her. It doesn't matter, he said firmly. Maya didn't push, but a chill ran through her anyway. Edward gestured to one of the other seats at the table. Sit. She hesitated, then walked forward and lowered herself into the chair. The leather was cold beneath her hands. She felt small and large at the same time. Edward stood at the head, his figure tall, his eyes locked on her. This, he said slowly, is only the beginning. Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. She didn't know what he meant, but she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that her life had just shifted in a way she couldn't yet see. Maya's fingers pressed against the armrests of the leather chair. The boardroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Edward Harlan stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on the back of the tall chair, his eyes fixed on her. She felt small beneath the weight of his stare, but she refused to look away. Edward finally spoke. Do you know how many people sit in this room and say what they think I want to hear? Maya shook her head slightly. Almost all of them, he said. His voice was low but sharp. They smile. They flatter. They repeat the same empty lines about growth, profits, efficiency. But when the real storm comes, they have nothing. You spoke differently. You talked about people. Fairness. Trust. Things that don't show up on balance sheets. Maya swallowed. Because numbers don't work without people, so someone has to remember that. Edward studied her for a long moment, then turned away, walking toward the windows at the far end of the boardroom. The city sprawled out below, skyscrapers, cars, the river glinting in the sunlight. From here, the city looked manageable, almost small. He clasped his hands behind his back. You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who fought for things that weren't popular in this building. His voice grew quieter. It cost her more than you'd imagine. Maya frowned slightly, but she stayed silent. Edward turned back, his face unreadable again. I'll tell you this, Ms. Johnson. If you want to survive here, if you want to win here, you'll need more than vision. You'll need strength. You'll need to stand when the room turns against you. And trust me, it will. Maya straightened in her chair. I've been standing against rooms my whole life, sir. A flicker of something passed across his eyes. Approval. Maybe even a shadow of respect. Before he could answer, the boardroom doors opened. Two of the interviewers walked in, their expressions tight. The woman led, her smile stiff. Mr. Harlan, may we have a word? Edward's jaw tightened. If it's about her, say it here. The woman hesitated, but then stepped forward. Her voice was polite, but there was an edge beneath it. With all respect, sir, we're concerned. This candidate, Ms. Johnson, she's not the right fit for Harlan & Co. We have a reputation to uphold. Clients expect a certain image, a certain kind of professionalism. Maya felt the words cut like blades. She knew exactly what image meant. She sat still, her nails digging in her palm beneath the table. Edward's voice was calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. Professionalism is not a haircut or skin tone. It's the ability to deliver results under pressure. And unless you've forgotten, she's already shown more insight than the last 3 candidates combined. The woman flushed, but pressed on. Sir, I'm only thinking of the firm's long-term interests. Edward's gaze snapped to her, cold and sharp. No, you're thinking of your comfort. The room went dead silent. The 2 interviewers exchanged a glance, then lowered their eyes. Edward turned back to Maya. Come with me. He walked out of the boardroom, and Maya followed quickly, her chest tight. They moved down another corridor, then into a quieter wing of the building. Edward pushed open a door to a private lounge, sleek chairs, a coffee bar, a large screen on the wall. It was quieter here, almost peaceful compared to the rest of the office. He motioned for her to sit. I'm going to tell you something, Ms. Johnson. Something I don't tell candidates. Maya sat slowly, her eyes locked on him. Edward lowered himself into the chair across from her. This company is bigger than you think. Bigger than clients and contracts. There are factions here. Groups of people who fight for control. Sometimes openly, sometimes in whispers. They look polished on the outside, but inside, it's a war. And when you walked into that interview room, you weren't just a candidate. You became part of that war. Maya felt a chill slide through her. What do you mean? Edward leaned forward. The 3 you met? They're not just interviewers. They're loyal to one side of this company. The side that believes everything is about image and power. They don't want thinkers. They want mirrors, people who look like them, act like them, never challenge them. You embarrassed them today, and they won't forget it. Maya's throat tightened, but her voice stayed calm. Then why keep me here? Edward's eyes sharpened. Because I need someone who doesn't bend. Someone who can see the truth when everyone else is blinded by appearances. You prove you can do that. Her pulse raced. She had come for a job interview, but this felt like something much larger. Edward sat back, his voice quieter now. But know this. If you stay in this building, you'll be tested harder than you've ever been. They'll try to break you, humiliate you, push you out. The question is, will you let them? Maya lifted her chin, her words firm. I won't. For the first time that day, Edward's mouth curved into a small, real smile. Good. Before anything else could be said, the lounge door opened. The assistant from earlier stepped in, his clipboard in hand. His face was pale. Sir, you're needed. Now. It's urgent. Edward stood instantly, his expression hardening. What is it? The assistant hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Maya nervously. Say it, Edward demanded. The assistant swallowed. It's the board. Sir, they've called an emergency meeting. Some of them aren't happy with recent choices. His eyes darted again toward Maya. Edward's jaw clenched. He glanced at Maya, then back at the assistant. Tell them I'll be there. The assistant nodded quickly and left. The room fell quiet again. Maya could feel the tension building like a storm pressing against the windows. Edward turned back to her. You're about to see what this company really is, Ms. Johnson. And it won't be pretty. Maya's chest tightened, but her voice stayed steady. Then let me see. Edward studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Follow me. They left the lounge and walked down a long hallway toward the elevators. The air seemed heavier, the silence thicker. Maya's footsteps echoed against the polished floors. As the elevator doors opened, Edward glanced at her once more. His voice was low, almost a warning. After today, nothing will ever be the same for you. The doors shut, sealing them inside. The elevator rose, floor by floor, carrying them toward the storm waiting above.
The elevator door slid open with a sharp chime, and Maya stepped out behind Edward. The hallway here was different from the rest of the building. The air felt colder, the walls darker, lined with polished wood and heavy glass doors. This was the board's floor, where the company's most powerful decisions were made. Edward walked briskly, his jaw set. Maya had to quicken her pace to keep up. 2 security guards in suits stood near the conference room at the end of the hallway. Their eyes flicked toward Maya with curiosity, but neither said a word. Edward pushed the double doors open without knocking. The room inside was wide, oval-shaped, with a long mahogany table in the center. Around it sat 12 board members, each in tailored suits, their faces stern and unwelcoming. At the head of the table, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes leaned back in his chair. He didn't rise when Edward entered. Edward, the man said smoothly, we weren't expecting a guest. His eyes shifted to Maya. Edward didn't flinch. She stays. The man's brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, his gaze swept across the room, and several members exchanged knowing looks. The atmosphere thickened, every silence loaded with judgment. Edward took a seat at the far end of the table. directly across from the silver-haired man. Maya stood behind him, her heart pounding in her ears. She could feel the stares, some openly dismissive, some coldly curious. The man folded his hands. This meeting is about stability. Edward, you made choices recently. Choices that concern us. Edward leaned forward. You mean her? He tilted his head toward Maya. A murmur passed around the table. One woman, with a pearl necklace that caught the overhead lights, spoke sharply. Edward, this firm has an image. That image is our strength. Every client, every partner trusts us because we project consistency, professionalism. When you bring in outsiders, unpolished and proven, it threatens everything. Maya felt the words burn, but she stayed silent. Edward's voice cut through the air like steel. What threatens this company is the stale thinking in this room. You built walls so high you can't see the ground anymore. She has more vision than half of you combined. The silver-haired man's eyes narrowed. You're reckless. You've always been reckless. I take risks, Edward said flatly. That's why this company is alive. The tension was electric now, every word snapping like a whip. Maya gripped the back of Edward's chair, her palms slick with sweat. Another board member, a man with a thick accent, leaned forward. Edward, this is not only about one candidate. It is about your disregard for process, for tradition. You forget this company is not yours alone. It belongs to all of us. Edward's laugh was short and bitter. Tradition? You mean the same tradition that's bleeding us dry? The world is changing while you sit here polishing your reputations. He turned his head slightly toward Maya. She sees it. You don't. The pearl necklace woman scoffed. She hasn't even been hired. She has no place here. At that, Maya finally spoke, her voice firm. I didn't ask for a place here. I came for an interview. What happened after was not my choice. But since I'm standing here, I'll say this. Your walls are cracking. You can feel it, even if you won't admit it. Clients don't want perfect images anymore. They want trust. They want honesty. They want real. And if you keep shutting out voices like mine, you'll lose more than your image. You'll lose everything. The room fell into stunned silence. Maya's own pulse thundered in her ears, but she didn't look away. One of the older men smirked faintly, bold, but naive. Edward slammed his palm on the table, making several members flinch. No, not naive. Exactly what this place needs. The silver-haired man leaned forward now, his eyes locked on Edward. And what if we disagree? Edward didn't blink. Then you'll see how quickly this company collapses without me holding together. Gasps rippled across the table. The words were a direct threat, and everyone knew it. The silver-haired man's lips curled into a thin smile. Be careful, Edward. You've made enemies today. Powerful ones. Edward's expression hardened. I've had enemies my whole career. I'm still standing. The room shifted again, whispers passing between board members. Some looked shaken, others angry. Maya could feel the current of battle rising beneath the polished surface. Finally, the silver-haired man raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. This discussion isn't over. We'll reconvene soon. Until then, we'll be watching. His eyes flicked toward Maya like a knife, then back to Edward. Edward stood, the chair scraping against the floor. Maya followed quickly. Neither spoke as they walked back down the hallway. The guards at the door exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't stop them. When the elevator doors closed again, the silence was heavy. Maya finally broke it. Why bring me into that room? Edward's jaw tightened. Because they needed to see you. To hear you. They won't admit it now, but your words rattled them. And rattling them is the first step. Maya exhaled slowly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. It feels like I just painted a target on my back. You did, Edward said bluntly. Then, after a pause, so did I. But that's how change starts. The elevator descended, the numbers glowing above the doors. When it stopped on the executive floor, Edward motioned for her to follow again. They stepped into his office, where the assistant was waiting nervously. Papers were stacked high on the desk, and the city skyline blazed behind the glass windows. The assistant shut the door after them. Edward walked to his desk, pressed his hands on the wood, and stared at Maya. You still want this? After everything you just saw? Maya's chest rose and fell. I didn't come here looking for a fight. But if that's what it takes to prove myself, then yes, I want it. For a long moment, Edward studied her, the silence stretching like a wire pulled tight. Then, slowly, he nodded. Good, he said, because the fight has only just begun. Maya felt the weight of his words settle over her, heavy and unshakable. She wasn't just in an interview anymore. She was in the middle of a war, one that could make or break her future. And deep down, she knew the board would not let her next move come easy. The night after the boardroom clash was long and restless for Maya. She sat in her small apartment, staring at the city lights blinking through her window. Every word from that meeting replayed in her head, heavy as bricks. She knew she had crossed a line most candidates would never dare touch. She had spoken against the board itself. That wasn't bravery, it was survival. Yet, survival came with consequences. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from an unknown number lit the screen. Be careful. They don't forget. Maya froze. She read it twice, then a third time. There was no name, no follow-up, just a warning. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. But deep down, she knew it wasn't random. Someone had been watching. The next morning, she arrived at the building again, determined not to show fear. The receptionist barely glanced at her before sliding a visitor badge across the counter. Maya clipped it to her blazer and walked toward the elevators. Halfway across the lobby, she felt it, eyes on her. She turned slightly and caught sight of two men in suits near the coffee stand. They looked away the moment her gaze landed on them. But not quickly enough. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for Edward's floor. As the doors closed, her reflection in the steel caught her eye. Her expression was hard, more serious than she had ever seen it. When she entered Edward's office, he was already pacing, his phone pressed his ear. His assistant sat stiffly by the desk, trying not to overhear. Edward hung up sharply. They're moving faster than I expected. Maya frowned. Ooh, the board. They're calling an emergency vote tomorrow. They want me out. The word struck like a punch. Out? They can do that. Edward gave a bitter laugh. They can try. They've been waiting for this chance. Yesterday just gave them fuel. Maya sank into a chair. So what happens to me if they win? Edward turned to her, his voice low and sharp. They'll erase you. Your name, your application, everything. You'll be labeled a mistake, a disruption. You'll never step foot in this industry again. Silence filled the office. Maya's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. So what do we do? Edward sat opposite her, leaning in. We fight back. They thrive on secrecy, on control. If we expose them, we shift the balance. Before Maya could ask how, the assistant knocked nervously. Sir, there's a call from Ms. Daniels. Maya blinked. For me? The assistant handed her the phone. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. Maya Daniels, we know you spoke yesterday. Brave, but foolish. Walk away now and you'll save yourself. Stay and you'll regret it. The line went dead. Maya lowered the phone slowly, her stomach in knots. They called me. They know where I am. Edward's expression darkened. They're testing you. They want fear to break you before tomorrow. Maya clenched her fists. Then they'll be disappointed. For the rest of the day, Edward worked the phones, calling allies, gathering files. Maya helped, sorting through reports, digging into numbers the board had hidden. What they found painted a damning picture. Overpriced contracts, buried losses, secret deals with competitors. It was rot hiding under the company's shiny image. By nightfall, Edward slammed the folder shut. This is it. Proof they've been lying to shareholders. If we drop this at the right moment, they'll choke on their own game. Maya leaned back, exhausted but alert. And if they bury it before anyone sees? Edward met her eyes. Then we need a witness. Someone inside who can't be silenced. He didn't say it outright, but she felt the weight of his stare. He meant her. The next morning came heavy with tension. As Maya walked into the building again, security was tighter. Guards stood at every corner. Whispers filled the lobby. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. When she reached Edward's floor, 2 guards blocked her path. Only board-approved personnel beyond this point. Maya raised her chin. Edward Winters is expecting me. The taller guard didn't move. Your name isn't cleared. Before Maya could respond, Edward appeared behind them, his voice sharp. She's with me? The guard stepped aside reluctantly. Maya followed Edward down the hall, her pulse racing. Inside his office, he handed her a small flash drive. This has everything. If I'm cut off during the meeting, you find a way to get this out. Maya took it, her fingers trembling slightly. You're trusting me with this? Edward gave a thin smile. I'm trusting you because you haven't blinked once since this started. Minutes later, they entered the boardroom. The atmosphere was different now, thicker, colder. The silver-haired man sat at the head of the table again, flanked by the others. Everyone's eyes burned with silent judgment. Edward and Maya took their places. The silver-haired man spoke first, his voice smooth as ice. Edward Winters, this council has lost confidence in your leadership. Effective immediately, we motion for your removal as CEO. Gasps broke out from a few assistants lining the walls. Edward didn't move. His face was carved from stone. The pearl necklace woman rose. All in favor? Several hands lifted around the table. Maya's chest tightened. This was happening too fast. Edward finally stood. His voice was calm, but iron hard. Before you vote me out, maybe you should explain these. He tossed a stack of papers onto the table, copies of files they had uncovered. The silver-haired man's smile faltered. The room buzzed with sudden whispers. Edward continued, louder now. Secret payouts, fake contracts, buried debts. You've been selling the company's future for your own gain. The pearl necklace woman's face turned pale. This is outrageous. Maya stepped forward suddenly, her voice cutting the room. It's not outrageous. It's proof. She slid the flash drive onto the table. And if you try to deny it, I'll make sure every shareholder sees what you've hidden. The boardroom erupted. Some shouted in protest, others in panic. The silver-haired man slammed his fist on the table. You don't belong here. You're nothing but a girl who doesn't understand the weight of this room. Maya met his fury with steady eyes. Maybe I don't, but I understand the truth. And the truth is stronger than any of you. For a moment, silence crushed the room. Then Edward spoke softly, almost like a warning. Careful. You're not just underestimating her. You're underestimating the storm that's coming. The meeting fractured after that. Voices rising, alliances breaking, accusations flying. The vote was postponed under the chaos, but Maya knew this was only a pause. The board wasn't finished. As she walked out of the room beside Edward, her chest heaved with adrenaline. She had stood her ground, but the war was far from over. And somewhere deep inside, she knew, the next move would decide everything. The air in the city that morning was heavy, as if even the sky knew what was coming. Maya woke early, her nerves like live wires under her skin. She barely touched her breakfast. Today wasn't just another meeting. It was the day the board would either crush her completely or be forced to face the truth she had carried into their fortress. Edward's message buzzed on her phone. It's time. Be ready for anything. She dressed carefully. A navy blue blazer, pressed slacks, clean shoes. No distractions, no excuses. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she whispered under her breath, You belong here. At the building. The lobby was busier than ever. Security buzzed like hornets. Journalists clustered outside the glass doors, shouting questions. Cameras flashing. Rumors had spread overnight. Something explosive was happening inside the company. Maya pushed through, showing her badge. The guards let her in. The one gave her a look that lingered longer than it should. She ignored it and walked straight to the elevators. When she reached Edward's office, he was standing by the window, staring out at the chaos below. He turned when he heard her footsteps. His face was pale, but set with determination. They're circling like vultures, he said quietly. The board thinks today is her victory lap. Maya dropped her bag on a chair. Then let's make it their last. Edward smiled faintly. That's why I trust you. They walked together toward the boardroom. The hallway felt longer than usual, each step echoing like a drumbeat. By the time they pushed through the heavy doors, the room was already packed. The silver-haired man sat at the head of the table again, his smirk cold and sharp. The pearl necklace woman whispered something to the man beside her, then looked up at Maya with open disdain. You shouldn't even be here, she said flatly. This is not your fight. Maya lifted her chin. It became my fight the moment you tried to erase me. Edward placed a folder on the table. Shall we begin? The silver-haired man leaned forward. Indeed, Edward Winters, this is your last day as CEO. We have the votes. We have the authority. Nothing you do will change that. Edward didn't flinch. Then let's put everything on the table. He signaled to Maya. She stepped forward, pulling the flash drive from her pocket. Her hands were steady, though her pulse raced like a drum in her ears. She plugged it into the projector, and the screen on the wall lit up. One by one, documents filled the screen. Secret payments, hidden losses, contracts signed in the shadows. Names, dates, numbers. The kind of evidence that didn't lie. Gasps spread across the room. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. The pearl necklace woman's face drained of color. Maya spoke clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. This is what you've been hiding. While employees worked long hours and investors trusted your promises, you sold this company piece by piece for your own gain. The silver-haired man slammed his fist on the table. This is slander. Edward cut in, calm but sharp. It's proof. Proof that you betrayed not just the company, but the people who built it. The room erupted in shouting. Some board members demanded answers. Others tried to deny everything. The chaos built until finally one shareholder in the corner, a man who had been silent until now, stood. I've seen enough, he said. His voice was steady, his presence commanding. We invested in leadership, not thieves. He turned his eyes to Maya. Who are you? The room fell silent. Every gaze landed on her. Maya took a breath. My name is Maya Daniels. I came here for a job interview. Instead, I was humiliated, dismissed before I could even speak. But I didn't leave. I stayed because I saw something worth fighting for. And now you see the truth yourselves. Her words cut through the air like glass. No one spoke. Then Edward stood, his eyes fixed on her. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed his chair back and stepped around the table. The room froze as he walked toward Maya. And then, without hesitation, Edward Winters, CEO of one of the largest firms in the country, bowed his head before her. You're not just a candidate, he said, his voice strong but reverent. You're the leader this place needs. From this moment, I follow you. A sharp gasp rippled through the boardroom. Some leaned back in shock. Others looked as if the ground had vanished beneath their feet. Maya stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking into her chest. Her throat tightened, but she held her ground. Edward. He raised his head, his eyes unwavering. Boss. The word hit the air like thunder. It was more than respect. It was surrender. The silver-haired man leapt to his feet, his face twisted in rage. This is madness. She's nothing. A stranger. We will not. But before he could finish, the shareholder who had spoken earlier turned to him with fire in his eyes. Enough. We've watched you line your pockets for too long. I would rather place my trust in someone who fought her way here with nothing but courage than in thieves who hide behind polished suits. Others nodded in agreement, the tide shifting rapidly. The pearl necklace woman stammered, trying to regain control. You can't just hand over power to. But her words faltered as reality settled in. The room was no longer hers. Maya's chest rose and fell, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't planned for it. But as Edward stood before her and the room shifted in her favor, she realized she could no longer deny what was happening. She had walked into this building seeking a chance. Instead, she had forced open a door no one thought she could touch. Now, all eyes were on her. And for the first time, Maya didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. The boardroom remained silent, the storm of power settling into something new, something they couldn't control anymore. And Maya knew this was just the beginning. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also an other to strengthen our community. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.